Alexander 15, April 4th, 45,784 BC. The fire was dimming, and Lylin said that she was growing tired. So Hemhut extinguished the flame and gently picked her up, cradling her in his arms, and started walking. "Hemhut, you've been talking all night, and I still don't know why you don't have to eat," she said, looking up at him. "You need to cut to it if you don't want to be slapped." "Well, think about what we know about time, and how my time machine worked," he said. "By mutually ceasing time for all of the universe, with me witnessing it at a normal speed, frozen in time, it caused the cessation of time to happen across the universe in no time at all. I inverted space-time in an instant, by making it so that from my perspective it would happen in real time, at light speed. Yet I would be veritably frozen, not moving at light speed myself, but spinning at such a significant fraction of light speed that I could not move. The intention was to create a bubble around myself of stopped time, and then jump the fence to the other side of the speed of light, thereby moving backward in time, and then to reverse the process once I had reached my destination. The machine was controlled with my mind, and I thought that I would be able to manipulate it once I'd set it into action, therefore sparing the universe from this fate. Because I perceived the wave of stop time to spread out at the speed of light, it should have given the machine plenty of time to increase its mass by way of harvesting subatomic particles from the quantum realm in its collector as designed, and therefore give it more intrinsic speed due to increased gravitational attraction. That would have sent me over the edge of light speed, and I would have been in control, and I could have reined in the effects, and no harm would have been done. Unfortunately, though I could think and attempt to use telekinesis to manipulate and command the machine itself was also rendered inactive by way of the cessation of time, and it would not respond. It did not have time to initiate the inverse procedure. Then it happened, and as the universe and I hurtled uncontrollably backward in time, the contents of space-time funneled in around me, and then everything stopped. She yawned and stretched and tried to keep her eyes open. "So you were literally nowhere?" "Yes, my love," he said. "With no space and no time, there is practically nothing, and I was literally nowhere, as you said. But when the collected energy, mass, time, space, and forces were gone, there was still one thing that remained. The rules, the laws of physics. Reality, or the lack thereof, still recognized the limits and laws of its own governing, its former and future structure being one and the same." "I'm falling asleep," she said. "Talk fast or bring your face down here." He said, thinking. "I think that perhaps my molecules still exist on the border of the speed of light due to such prolonged exposure to the cessation of time and exceedingly long backward time travel, and that I have simply learned to compensate for bordering the limits allowed by existence, and am in reality still frozen in time. In essence, I do not age, yet I can interact with my environment due to the strength of my will to do so, meaning that my body does not experience time, but my mind does. And because my mind is so powerful, I can force my body to move. It is entirely possible that as I move, instead of carrying my molecules with me, I form them anew with every step. I cannot fully explain myself, my love, like I said. I can only speculate, but you are right. It is strange that I exert energy having no energy requirements myself. It seems to defy natural law, and yet it must not, because it obviously is possible, otherwise I would have to eat or draw energy from some source or another, and I do not." "Hemhut," she said, "I warned you. Bring your face down here so I can smack it." Her giant smiled and obliged, and stooped his head down and gently lifted her, and she slowly lifted her tired arm and lightly slapped his cheek. Then she said, "I love you, Hemhut." "I love you, Lylin," he said, and he watched her close her eyes. He was just mounting the last hilltop between the lake and their home, and she opened her eyes for a few winks as the golden light of their palace washed over the dark behind her eyelids. Then she fell asleep in his arms. Her bed was the most comfortable bed ever devised. She awoke hours later in her huge bed and threw aside her sheets and immediately went off in search of Hemhut, calling his name. Their palace was huge. It shined in the morning light, and she skipped down the hallway, calling for him again. His voice sounded from through the open windows. "I am outside, my love." Hemhut did not sleep. He could not sleep. He was likely capable of sleeping, but were he to doze off, Lylin would be doomed. The full wrath of Mother Tawala would come crashing down upon her, suffocating and freezing her to death within minutes. He was actively keeping the forces of nature at bay, and their powers were ever increasing, further encroaching on their safe slice of world. She approached him, and he placed the flower wreath he'd made for her in the night atop her head. This one was pink and green, two of her many favorite colors, and it had a red flower woven into the band which he placed at the center of her forehead. She hugged his waist, looked up at him, and said, "Hello, Hemhut." "Hello, Lylin," he said, looking down at her lovingly as she climbed up his body. "Let's go to the fruit grove, I'm starving," she said, and pointed toward it from her perch on his shoulder. Hemhut started off in the direction she had bid him walk, the morning sun shining off of the most perfect patch of Tawala in existence, their estate. To describe it merely as picturesque would do it no justice. It was an impossible land harvested from dreams, built for his queen with her heart's every desire in mind. Their palace shone of shimmering gold, cascading white and hints of scattered blue, and sat abreast a waterfall whose waters never ran dry. Fields of wildflowers and blossoming trees decorated the hillside landscape, and it was always a perfect temperature. It was absolute paradise, and Lylin lacked for nothing there. "I don't know if I heard you right last night, Hemhut, 'cause I was falling asleep, but did you say that adding mass increases your intrinsic speed?" she asked. "That's how you intended to operate your machine? Did I get that right?" "Yes, my love, that is precisely what I said," he said. She shook her head and waved her hands in the air and said, "Do I just have to trust you on this, or are you going to explain yourself?" "Of course I will explain," he said, "but it involves understanding a wholly different theory, the theory of gravity, the theory of general relativity. It is in how these principles and laws work in concert with one another that the limits of existence are defined. For, yes, you heard me right. The more massive an object is, the more energy it has. Thus, the faster its intrinsic speed becomes. Make something massive enough, and it will actually trap light. The light will be able to go in, but if an object's gravitational attraction is great enough, its escape velocity will become that of the speed of light. You know what such bodies are called. They are black holes. So, there are two ways to increase your speed. Either accelerate along your trajectory or increase your mass and thereby your gravity. I know that you're thinking that speed and gravity should not be related, but have you ever considered what gravity is? How objects that do not touch attract one another?" "Electromagnetic fields, right?" she said. "No?" "That is an excellent guess, my love, but no. Gravity is not the result of electromagnetism. Any other guesses?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, resting an arm on top of his head. "Does it have anything to do with time, like the things we were discussing yesterday?" "Yes and no," he said. "Space and time are the same thing. Therefore, anything that has something to do with the one invariably has to do with the other as well, but it does not rely on the principles we discussed yesterday. They are intertwined only by the merit that they are fundamental parts of existence. General relativity describes the mechanism that actually allows distant objects to act upon one another across the reaches of space, and that mechanism is space itself." "What?" she said in disbelief, stroking one of her ears, nose twitching to take in the morning aromas. "Did you get into the mungaweed last night?" He laughed and he said, "That's funny." "But space is nothing. How can nothing do something?" She pricked up her ears. "Is it nothing?" Hemhut said. They were getting close to the fruit grove. "Space and time are the same thing. Is time nothing?" "Well, yeah," she said. "Right?" "This is the realm where our intuition fails us, my love," he said. Space is a conduit, a reactive field that allows for the presence of existence, and it bends in the presence of mass. The magnitude of the curvature of space is determined by the density of the mass. The more massive the object, the greater the degree of the curve inflicted on the surrounding space. Now, how is it that adding mass increases your intrinsic speed? Think about what we know about acceleration and motion. Remember the light clock and how the moving clock had to follow a longer path. When light travels through space, it does so in straight lines at light speed. But when it encounters a curved portion of space, it bends along the curvature. The light is still traveling in a straight line, but the line has curved. Now, again, if you trace a path between 2 points in space along a straight line, it is a shorter distance than tracing between the same 2 points along a curved line. The more extreme the curve, the longer the path becomes. Thus, gravity and acceleration have the same effect on the passage of time. The time warp effect imposed by massive bodies is known as gravitational time dilation. Think about the passage of time in extreme curved space like the distance between us and the base of the lakeside hill. The actual distance between the base of one side of the hill and the other is a straight line through the hill. If I burrowed through the hill at 10 feet per second, and the base of the other side of the hill was 50 feet away, it would take me 5 seconds to get there. If I climbed over the hill at the same rate of speed, at 10 feet per second, then I would have to walk the extra distance created by the curving height of the hill, extending the time it takes to reach the other side, varying in duration by how high the hill is. Make the hill higher, and it takes even longer to travel the curved path. Make the hill high enough, and you get a black hole from the extreme curvature, an unreachable destination. Even small amounts of isolated mass are subject to gravitational time dilation, but to a practically imperceptible degree. The effects are only effectively measurable when observing very massive objects, like planets and stars. So, since the effects on space-time are the same for objects traveling at relativistic speeds as compared to having proximity to highly massive bodies, one can reasonably conclude that energy and mass are equivalent. Having high mass is the same as moving at high speeds. Increasing mass is the same as increasing speeds, and increasing speed is the same as increasing mass. "Careful of the bugs, my love," he said, and he set her down. He'd used the Tuvaluan word kipits in place of bugs to avoid confusion. "Wait, so does that mean that creatures living on more massive planets experience slowed time?" she asked. "Perceptive, my love. You're almost there, but no," he said. "Remember, any object at rest can argue that the effects of time dilation are causing other objects to experience time differently and not themselves. Any object in motion along a straight trajectory at a set speed will have the right to argue that they are at rest, their total speed accounting also for their respective mass, and will always experience time amid surroundings which are traveling with them in their same reference frame, to be progressing normally. They would argue that it is you who is experiencing slowed time." "Would they age slower than me?" she asked. Yes, they would," he said. "Increased mass means increased speed, which means slowed time. So they would appear to age much slower than you. Yet, as they look at you, they would see your aging slowed to the same degree, consistent with their rate of existence. The further you distance yourself from a highly massive body, the faster you experience time and the faster you age. Conversely, the closer you get to a massive body, the slower you experience time and aging slows down. It follows that even though the relativity of simultaneity describes differing observers to be witnessing the other's actions with discrepancies to their own experience of time, the truth is found in calculating the intrinsic speed, the total mass and energy of a given object. So, even though circumstances make it so that your mutual observations of one another indicate a shared slowing of the passage of time, the reality is that the more massive, intrinsically faster object is truthfully experiencing slower processes, evident by the presence of more energy. Perception is a fickle mistress. She often misleads her onlookers. Remember that the simplistic application of these theories is relevant only to bodies in fixed motion in a straight trajectory, at a fixed speed, or one that is accelerating. Remember also that acceleration will cause disparities in intrinsic speed to become apparent. The instant one of the two compared objects accelerates, the difference in their intrinsic speeds becomes known, because then they will no longer experience a mutual slowing of the perception of one another's time. The accelerating person will see processes from the stationary person sped up, and the stationary person will see processes for the accelerating person slowed down. If they were talking to one another over a mechanical device, the accelerating person would hear the stationary person's voice at a higher frequency, and the stationary person would hear the accelerating person's voice at a lower frequency. If they were observing clocks on one another's person, they would see an equivalent disparity in the passage of time. The degree to which this difference is apparent indicates the inherent intrinsic speed, the energy of the object in question. Since acceleration is the same as accreting mass, then yes, despite what observations tell you, creatures living on more massive planets with higher gravity age slower. Their biological processes are slower due to gravity's effect on the progression of time. Observations between two bodies at rest but in different reference frames, wherein one appears to be moving in comparison to the other, will indicate a consistent mutual slowing of time, but this is an artifact of the geometry. In reality, high-mass objects really do experience slower time than low-mass objects. She waited for him to finish speaking before she started picking her fruit, looking up at him all the while, his bulk shielding her eyes from the sun, her blue and white fur flowing in the breeze. She was a clever, intelligent, witty, contemplative girl, but she'd had enough. She wanted to change the subject. These concepts needed to settle into her brain, and she would need more time and a more thorough explanation before she would fully grasp them. And eventually she would, but for now, she was ready to talk about something less mind-boggling. Additionally, her hormonal cycle was nearing the height of sexual receptiveness, and the flood of hormones interacting with her nervous system made it difficult to concentrate. She just needed to know one more thing. "Wait a second, Hemhut," she said. "If adding mass makes time progress slower, then how is it that adding mass to your time machine would have made you go faster than light speed?" "Remember, my love, adding mass is the same as accelerating. The slowing of time is a compensatory mechanism to maintain balance in the universe and occurs in response to any acceleration and any accretion. It stops further acceleration and stops further accretion by slowing relative time." I thought that I could defy the laws a step further than I already had, but with time robbed of me, I could do neither. I could not take on mass, which would have taken time, and I also could not accelerate for the same reason. I did not account for the mass that my machine and I collectively comprised, thinking myself only a mind, he said, watching her climb a tree to get at the fruit he could have easily plucked for her, her bare bottom flashing at him from under her skirt as she moved. Deep down, I knew exactly what would happen, but I did it anyway, because I was alone, doomed to be alone forever, I believed. I had never known love, and I was desperate to find it before my end, so I activated my machine, knowing all too well the consequences. But it was a chance for me where there was none besides. "So you destroyed the entire universe because you were lonely?" she asked, her voice muffled and words garbled by a piece of fruit she carried between her teeth as she climbed back down to the ground. "I destroyed the universe in search of you, my love," he said, "and you could not be more perfect. As damning as it may be, I would do it all again just to know you all the more. Just like how you were allowing the rest of Tuala to be destroyed at an accelerated rate in order to keep me comfortable and well," she said. "Do you really care only for me? Do the lives of all other creatures serve no purpose in your eyes?" "None but that which is a purpose aimed at showering you with the life I would have for you, Lylin," he said. "You are the only thing that matters to me. I would burn down the cosmos in your defense, rip it apart to see your smile, annihilate it to hear your laugh." "That's pretty despicable, my love," she said, taking a bite of the juicy fruit. "I would gladly give my life to spare lives you would so carelessly extinguish. Have you compassion for none but me? I have learned that acts of compassion, acts of benevolence, are in the end balanced by acts of malice and spite. There is no helping the many without it being to the detriment of many others. He watched the juice roll down her chin, and she reminded him of the goofy-looking child he'd met those 17 years past, until, of course, the juice dripped down onto her breasts, and he was reminded what a woman she'd become. "Oh, poop," she said, noticing how the juice had dripped onto her chest. "I'm going to be all sticky. I guess you'll have to lick the juice off of me where it drips." "Of course, my love," he said, aroused by the notion, aroused more so by reading her body language. She was coming into heat, and she was elongating her movements, over-sexualizing them in response to the flow of hormones running through her bloodstream. "Everywhere it drips," she said, and she began to squeeze juice from the fruit onto her body, from her breast down to her vagina, rubbing it into her vagina, spurring an involuntary gyrating movement in her hips. "Yes, my love," he said. "Lay down." She smiled and slowly hoisted up her skirt, then lay on the grass as her giant kissed and licked the inner part of her thigh, lightly caressing the flesh adjacent her vagina before making contact with his flicking tongue. She pressed on the back of his head and pivoted her hips, moaning in ecstasy as he perfectly and adeptly responded to where and how she needed to be touched, kissed, and licked to propel her to the height of pleasure. Never a better lover could there be than the one who could read your thoughts, knows all of the possible threads of the future, and follows only the one most pleasing to their love. This is what it was to be the lover of Hemhut. It was to be the most loved. He moved up her body and sucked the juice from around her breast as she clawed at his chest. Then his genitalia descended from his body, and he turned her over. "Oh yes," she said, thrilling at his gentle yet exceedingly powerful touch. "Fuck me." He made the ground rise underneath her hands and knees to bring her little body up to the appropriate height, and then rubbed his penis back and forth against the exterior of her bright pink vagina for a few seconds before he put it in. She blurted a momentary high-pitched squeal, and her body went rigid when he first plunged it into her. Then she relaxed and swayed her hips side to side before she started rocking back and forth, making little cooing sounds. "Okay, come on," she said. Then she gripped the ground with both hands, pulling up grass and dirt as she made fists, and her feet curled and involuntarily lifted into the air as he began rhythmically fucking her from behind. He hoisted her skirt up to reveal more of her shapely behind, and squeezed her exposed ass as he increased depth and speed. "Oh, Hemhut," she said, eyes crossing a little as they closed while he reached a hand down to rub her nipples. She was in ecstasy, and she had several orgasms before she recoiled from him and brushed the dirt off of her knees, and she stood. Hemhut never came. There was no climax for him but to share in the delight of hers, but he didn't care. He could not be happier, because she could not be happier. She was his true love, and she was perfect in every way. She looked up at the choice fruit, pointed at one, and said, "Now I'm really hungry. Can you get that one for me?" "Of course, my love," he said, and his genitalia and penis retracted into his body, leaving behind naught but the smoothness of stone once more, as he reached up and plucked the fruit of her desire from the vine. She giggled, still shaken from the great sex, and shivered as he handed it to her, and she looked him up and down, her giant, her devoted love, as she sank her teeth into it, this time more careful to keep the juice from spilling. She said as she broke eye contact with him, no doubt thinking some curious thought of him, and she skipped away and he followed. He would follow her anywhere, do anything for her, however unreasonable or catastrophic the toll. She was his very reason for being. Without her, he would not be whole. Without her, even amidst the most numerous crowds, he would be alone. There would never be another Lylin. Lylin 4.2, April 13th, 1178 BC. Lylin, in little Palatepta's body, marveled at the sight of Hemhut's work. She was too far to actually witness the battle firsthand, but she saw every facet of it through the eyes of those who fought it. He remembered her cues and what to listen and look for, and slithered unseen between the fleet of ships that the sea peoples had sailed in. An unceasing shower of arrows rained down from the sky. The Egyptian army was assailing them from the shore. Hemhut would have undoubtedly been seen were it not for the hail of arrows, for the sea peoples were collectively shielding themselves from the skyward threat, and none sensed any danger from below, not until one of their boats inexplicably capsized, and those of its complement who were not eviscerated by the shadow of arrows were impossibly sucked under the water as though they had been seized by an unseen whirlpool, one by one. The unseen monster moved through the mass of ships, Lylin alone only somewhat conscious of his position, until he heard the next utterance she'd bid him listen for, and he isolated the boat that the sound had come from and moved toward it. The warriors aboard this vessel met the same unsuspecting fate as had the first, and he went on from aim to aim, and soon his work was done, and he returned unseen to Lylin, on the beach further down the coast. Ramesses III made short work of what remained of the armada, employing clever tactics. He ordered the use of grappling hooks to be used to hoist their boats close to the Egyptian boats, placing them side by side atop the water. The Egyptian soldiers then boarded the ships of the sea peoples, who no longer stood any chance in hand-to-hand combat against them. Many of them surrendered, and Ramesses allowed them to stay on as subjects. The artillery line, the archers at the forefront of the Egyptian defense, remained intact thanks to Lylin and Hemhut, and, though there were many losses, they'd ended up saving countless lives in comparison to what would have happened had their line been broken. Lylin was sitting on the beach with her knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. She looked subtly discontented as she watched the battle and listened to the anguished cries from the distance. Hemhut surfaced from the water, and she did not get up. She just sat and watched. Hemhut, half of his body out of the water, stopped and looked at her. She stared off into the distance and patted the ground next to her, then briefly looked at him and said, "Come and sit with me, Hemhut." He did as she commanded and sat next to her on the beach, watching the battle, hardly distinguishable to all but him at such a distance. They sat in silence, Lylin looking into the future, analyzing important forthcoming junctions, turning points in history that either must or mustn't come to fruition. "In some ways, a great burden has been lifted from me now, my love," she said, staring deeper and deeper into nothing and everywhere. "I was once wrought with guilt for the fate of futures I would deny, condemned in my own mind for never letting live children that would no longer be born due to the effects of my existence, due to birthing a different future with different children, sometimes simply by saying the right thing to the right person, causing temporary positive change, but wiping out a potential future timeline and all of its brood and their accomplishments at the same time. Sometimes something as simple as moving a plant from one side of a room to another would result in the addition and subtraction of future human bloodlines. I would feel guilty if I helped someone, seeing the eventual pain it would cause, and at the same time I would feel guilty if I didn't help them. I was hesitant to do anything at all because of the far-reaching implications of my every action. I tried my best. But now there is only one path. I have been freed of the burden of choice. It actually allows me to focus my mind a lot better. I see things with great clarity, and I can study the intricacies of this path and mold it all the more to my liking, to be all the more perfect when the moment arrives that I come face to face with this demon. In a way, I do not fear the future in the way I once did, even though I know what awaits me at its end." "Why can we not fight this demon together?" he asked. "Why must you face him alone?" "Why does the bird fly and the fish swim and the sun rise, Hemhut?" she retorted. "It is simply the way that it is, the way it must be. If he sees you again, it is all over. There is no path to victory for us unless you stay hidden. Besides, you can't touch him, Hemhut. The only reason I ever actually get my hands on him is because of the culmination of very specific circumstances. You are strong and powerful, my love, but even you cannot hope to fight that which you cannot touch. Exposing yourself would only bring chaos, usher in a different future, and like I said, this path is the only path that ends in his destruction. You must remain invisible, Hemhut. Everything depends upon it." "Yes, my love," he said, watching her watch the battle rage on as the sea peoples were slowly but verily subdued. She stood and climbed up onto him, and he stood and asked, "Which way, my love?" She pointed, and he walked, Lylin perched on his shoulder. To Babylon, my love. Only a few must die there in order to ensure its fall. Then on to Elam, where many must die to ensure it rises to attack Babylon, she said. It is odd how things always seem to balance out in the end. Where we need to kill but a few, many will later die, and where we kill many, they later thrive. There are scientists in the future who are starting to unravel the secrets of the inner workings of existence, critical in the development of the technology needed to destroy the demon. They discover that these kinds of phenomena seem to pervade existence in a literal way, Hamhut. As unlikely as it seems, the fabric of the cosmos itself seems to have embedded in it an underlying design aimed at achieving balance. No wound is ever so deep that it cannot be healed, no understanding so important that it cannot be forgotten. I used to think that it was just me, but it seems that it is true. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. What does it mean, my love? He asked. I wish I knew, Hamhut, she said. I wish I knew.